biggest mistake I ever made in security. Go.
I was doing a penetration assessment for a large ticket sales site. I was told that we were not doing this in production. It was QA, so that'd be safe, right? And I got kind of lazy with the cross-site scripting testing. I used some broken HTML tags, and I took down their main site.
You're listening to CISO Series Podcast, recorded in front of a live audience.
Welcome, everybody, to the CISO Series Podcast. My name is David Spark, and to my left right here is the co-host. Been there since day one, none other than Mike Johnson, the CISO of Rivian. Let's hear it for him. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with the CISO Series Podcast, this is a live show right now, but we have lots of shows on our network, and you can check them out at CISOseries.com. Now, our sponsors for today's episode, and I do want to mention them because they're also sponsors at the event we're at. We are at the Planet CyberSec Conference in Mountain View, California. Let's hear it for Planet CyberSec. So sponsoring us and also sponsoring Planet CyberSec, we have Eclipsium, supply chain security for the modern enterprise. Let's hear it for them. And we also have Normalize, keep track of what matters most, your data. Let's hear it for them. Thank you. We're going to be hearing a lot more from both of them a little bit later in the show. But first, Mike, we have done many a live show before. Let me ask you, we do the virtual shows where we're sitting at home streaming, like connecting through a Zoom-like call. What is the big difference between the fact that you know people like or dislike you in front of a live show?
Oh, like or dislike. Really what I like about the live show is the energy. Like you have that direct feedback.
So I don't give you enough energy virtually?
Sir,
No.
No. You're just this little postage stamp on my screen. So
you make the screen
different.
that small. All right. We appreciate the live energy here, and also the fact that we got a chance to come to this event. So I greatly appreciate it. I'm not going to waste any more time. I want to bring our guest here. He's been on the show before. He is the CISO for Nextdoor, none other than TC Nijelkovsky. Let's hear it from TC.
Great to be in Mountain View.
Surprising research just in.
Do we still need to care about what devices our employees are using? So according to research from CyberArk, the issue isn't employees blurring the line between work and personal devices. The line doesn't exist at all. Shwarma Sharma at CSO Online notes that over 97% of U.S. office workers use the same device for work and personal activities. Why don't we might as well just say 100%? With 17% of them always commingling use cases on a single device. So I will start with you, Mike. Is the answer for everyone to carry two devices, or should this just push us to, well, like he's pulling them out, for those who are just listening to this, should they just push us to double down on zero trust? You've got two devices as you are showing to everybody here. What is the case, Mike?
Yeah, so ever since I got a work cell phone, I've always been a two-phoner. Like that's just been my personal mode of operating. And the past few companies that I've worked at, it's been very much, if you need access to company resources, you need to have MDM. That was just the standard. And what that meant was if people wanted access from their personal phone, they had to install MDM. If they didn't like the MDM policy, we would give them a work phone. It's like, cool, no problem. Understand that you've got concerns about that. Here's a work phone. And when I came to Rivian, it was like, oh, I'll just do that again. That's worked successfully several times in the past. And I heard the first good reason to not do that. And so I work for an electric vehicle company. We actually care about the environment. And our CEO said, I don't want to contribute to the e-waste problem by buying thousands of phones. I don't want to do that. So we need to find a different path forward. So I do think it's a solvable problem. You just need to think about it in a different way. And we're looking at it from, it's a data-centric approach. So if you're only going to be accessing email and calendar and whatnot, the risk is different than if you're going to be accessing our internal Confluence or our internal intellectual property. And that's where we draw the line. So the way that I think about this is data-centric, and that's the way that we need to be thinking about this going forward.
All right, so it's not a full zero trust. It's a tiered situation.
It's a tiered situation based on the data.
All right, TC, you up 2 devices. You just have 1, right?
I think it depends on your threat model. So when I was at the Federal Reserve, I had 2 devices and I had a clear separation between my work device and my personal device.
Did your federal one have a camera on it or no camera?
I don't think it had a camera.
Okay.
I don't think it had a camera. But part of the reason I got so excited being back in Mountain View, I started my career in the South Bay and working at small startups, working at medium-sized startups, having a nice laptop is a perk. And one of the things we're seeing, going through the economy, all these layoffs, a lot of companies are even letting the employees that they lay off keep their laptop. It's a recognition that this is something that you need. It's something that's really nice and it's going to help you get that next job. And this is actually something powerful enough to help you do the coding, help you do the research that you need to stay employed. So I think, these numbers, it totally makes sense to me to acknowledge that people are using their work devices as a personal device, unless you really have a threat model that requires something different. And I think the challenge is really sussing out what's acceptable or not usage of that personal device. And so I think there's almost like theaters of war, right? So there's the endpoint. Obviously, you don't want someone running malware on the computer. Obviously, you want to make sure it's encrypted. You want all the MDM controls in place. But then the other piece is the browser. So I think when we talk about people doing non-work stuff on their work computer, it's probably going to places, visiting websites. And that's an area that's really complex. It's not just that you went to a non-work website. It's all the potential plugins you can be running, things you can be granting if you're like a Google Workspace customer, granting access to your Google account on your behalf. There's so much opportunity for data leakage or power that you're giving. Like we talked about, is zero trust going to solve this? It is that person using that computer, right? And it's coming from their browser making this malicious request. So I think zero trust, I don't think is going to be a solution to this. We really need to focus on the browser, and that's where these enterprise secure browsers that we're seeing are really powerful.
How scared should we be?
So a little over a month ago, that's from when we're recording this episode, Postgres developer Andres Freund discovered threat actors that hijacked the open source XZ project that could have installed a backdoor on millions of Linux systems overnight. Now, this was a years-long, sophisticated attack at the open source supply chain, and researcher Kevin Beaumont put together a nice primer on it. But the core issue was the volunteer maintainer of XZ was looking to hand off the project and fell victim to social engineering. And it was a long con here. So there's an old XKCD comic that all modern digital infrastructure rests on, quote, a project some random person in Nebraska has been thanklessly maintaining since 2003. This seems so far down the line of concerns, old open source, even if it is vital. How do you handle it? I'm going to start with UTC. Do you budget time and money for open source like a law firm does for pro bono work? Or do you look to build new resilience programs? Of course, you want to do everything, but really the number one thing is what is most effective here?
Yeah, I think this first part, budgeting time for open source, I think that really depends on the size of the enterprise. Do you have the money and time to commit those type of resources? And that's not going to be every company. But in terms of what's most effective, my understanding is there's not an anti-malware or SAST or some sort of code analysis tool that was going to pick up this vulnerability. It was luckily observed in terms of how long it was taking, what was it, SSL to run on his machine. Hey, this is taking a bit longer than normal. Let me look into this. And he happened to find this vulnerability. So I think what we know is tonight, tomorrow, probably on a Friday evening, right before a 3-day weekend, there's going to be a new 0 day. And we're all going to have to go look everywhere within our infrastructure, both our corporate assets, our laptops, and our cloud infrastructure. And if you have on-prem, God bless you, right? But there's going to be a new 0 day. You need to find it, and you need to know, is this actually something that's exploitable, that actually has an impact in my environment? And what do I need to do to tear it out? So that capability, it's happened for Log4j, it's happened with libwebp, it's happened here in this case. instantly being able to look at that infrastructure, accurately identify where it is, and then get the engineering teams that can make that change and push it to production. And that's a key capability, especially for software companies.
All right. What do you think is most effective, Mike?
What I like that you called out there is a lot of it comes back to inventory. Know that this stuff is in your environment. A lot of folks have SSH. I mean, it's kind of a normal thing, but do you have SSH exposed to the internet? Are you running SSH in a configuration that this is a problem for you? So coming back to knowing your environment, knowing what you have can help you be better positioned when something like this happens again. This isn't a solvable problem. We've been talking about open source and our dependency on open source back when Heartbleed was the thing many, many years ago. It was actually what inspired the XKCD comic. And we're still in the situation where our companies rely a lot on open source, and we can't exhaustively look at everything that comes into the environment. But if you know it's there, if you understand what's going on in the broader community and you can react to it, and maybe you have some isolation capabilities, you have other mitigations that you can bring to bear, that's what really matters.
So I'm just doubling down on my opening question. Resilience is really the best way to deal with this.
Yes. I
Not
think
going to find all the possible permutations, because it seems like an impossible problem to even discover.
no, it is being in a situation where you can be resilient to one of these being in your environment. And if something like this happens in your environment and you're not capable of dealing with it, you're going to have a bad day when it happens.
Yeah, what you said about inventory. So like in cloud environments, right? There's a cloud security posture management tooling that can help identify these types of libraries or vulnerabilities in your environment. And the capability for an agentless solution where you don't need to have an agent running on the host. So that's probably going to be the inventory you know about. It's the inventory where you've made sure to put an agent on it. But having an agentless capability that says, hey, and I found it over here, surprise, surprise, maybe you do want to stick an agent on this host, but by the way, you have this critical vulnerability. That's a very powerful capability, because I think the inventory problem, just recognizing that as a problem and almost like kind of changing the mathematical set, right? Okay, well, whatever it is that we're running in AWS, we're running in these accounts. So having an agentless solution that can look at those accounts and find everything inside them.
Who's our sponsor this week?
So let me mention one of our awesome sponsors, and that would be Eclipsium, the leader, and it's very apropos, in supply chain security for critical software, firmware, and hardware in enterprise infrastructure. So CISO Series listeners can learn more about Eclipsium by visiting their website, eclipsium.com/spark. That's my last name. I'll spell that in a second, but not my last name, but Eclipsium. But there, if you go there, you will find the ultimate guide to supply chain security, an on-demand webinar presented by Paul Asadorian called Unraveling Digital Supply Chain Threats and Risk, a paper on the relationship between ransomware and the supply chain, and a customer case study with DigitalOcean. If you're interested in seeing their product in action, you can also sign up for a demo. You can do all of it. Just go to eclipsium.com/spark, and you spell Eclipsium ECLYPSIUM.com/spark.
It's time to play What's Worse?
All right. For those of you who are not familiar with this show, this is a game that we play on the show, and it is a risk management exercise. I provide two horrible scenarios. Neither one is good.
They both suck.
And they both stink. And you have to decide, first my guess, and I will go out to the audience, which one is worse. I always ask Mike, my co-host, to answer first. And then TC, you can agree or disagree with him. All right? So here we go. Comes from an anonymous listener. Situation number one. Vendor has a backlog for almost 2 years and never underwent a third-party cyber due diligence/risk assessment review before contracting. So got 2 years of third-party vendors with no review. Got it?
All right.
Sounds pretty bad.
Yep.
All right. Board of directors. This is scenario two. Board of directors that says they care about cybersecurity, but refuse to use anything but their personal emails to share sensitive company information. Which one is worse?
Oh, so this is one of those where it's not, A and then the opposite of A. These are just
I purposely did
Yeah.
it so the little logic game will play a little differently here.
Yeah. So the first situation, you've got your supply chain. You're trying to properly secure that. You've got 2 years worth of backlogs of vendors that you've signed on and you haven't reviewed any of them. Right. And so the second one is the board of directors just uses personal email for all of their conversations.
Well, it's all sensitive company information. So it's like you have no security on company data.
But just for the board of directors. That was...
Yes. Okay. Yeah. It's just the board of directors. Good point.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. In scenario A, you've got data that's flying around. You don't know the security of that. Scenario B, you've got data flying around and you don't know the security of that.
Yes.
So, boiling it down to that, I really think A is the worst scenario where it's not just the communications amongst the board that are the problem. It is your data, your customers' data, the email that's actually going to the board of directors. But essentially insecure. And you should assume
but let me qualify that. It's 2 years. They never actually underwent the due diligence. That doesn't mean it is for sure insecure. Your board of directors is for sure sharing data through sensitive information. So you just haven't done your due diligence. It could be you have awesome third-party vendors.
Right, but you don't know.
But you don't know. The second case, they stink.
They don't. I mean,
No, because they're putting it through personal email.
But it could
copying
be actually...
and pasting social security numbers right into a personal email.
That's their social security.
Could be
that's their
anybody's.
bad decision.
Yes, exactly.
So I really do think it's, the vast majority. It's like the quantity versus quality problem. Right?
Okay.
The first case, it's just everything. The second case, it's a small subset. So I think it's really just the orders of magnitude are different here. So I think the scenario A is the worst one.
All right. Let's hear it from UTC. Which one's worse?
Yeah, I'm going to forget the author. I think it was Rawls had this concept of a veil of ignorance, where if we sat around and, what kind of society do we want to live in, and had to choose and make the rules before we enter that society, we would want to maximize our minimum level of satisfaction, right? So I guess the way I'd look at this problem, I know what those board emails are that are circulating in the second scenario, right? I know what data has been exposed. In the first scenario, it's not just data being exposed. It's actually like, what is our production infrastructure? What's running on our production infrastructure? Who are these vendors that we're giving information to? What are they doing with that information? There's some really scummy stuff out there when you take a look at the way some of these vendors work, the way that they can monetize the information you give them. And then how do you even back out of that? If you rely on that vendor and you've been doing that for years, how much work would it take to back out of that and recover from that situation? So I think the board email, at least I know how bad it is. I'd rather start with that than take a chance on how terrible the first scenario could be.
Okay. All right. Now I'm going to throw this to the audience. So we get agreement on this one. Yes, got agreement.
Yeah, and actually TC's answer was better than mine.
Okay.
I just want to highlight
so
that.
He's 1+,
Yes.
if you will. All right. I'm going to go to the audience. By applause, how many think the first scenario is worse, not doing due diligence on all the vendors for 2 years? By applause. So it's pretty overwhelming. All right. By applause, how many think board of directors sending sensitive information through their personal email is worse? By applause. All right. So a few non-enthusiastic responses.
They were very enthusiastic.
What is Dave's mom talking about?
All right, everybody. This is a brand new game, and I have to cover this up because I don't want you to see it, because these are where all they are.
You don't want me to cheat.
Don't want you to cheat. Okay, here's the deal, everybody. I interviewed my mother about cybersecurity. I gave her some terms in cybersecurity, some like technology names. I gave her some possible threats. She doesn't know what these are, but just hearing the words, she did her best effort to describe what it is. I'm going to give you one giant hint. They are all 100% wrong.
Great.
Okay? My mother couldn't explain any of these. So you have to do some reverse logic thinking here and think, if I had heard this term, by the way, you know what these terms are. Just want to point that out. If you heard this term for the first time, didn't know anything about cyber, how would you describe it? Okay? So let's see if you can do this. Here we go. The first one.
It's like the mega millions. It's the big payout.
What do you think my mother is describing? And I'll give you, it's a type of technology. What? Someone get this? It's not ransomware. It's definitely not ransomware. Come on.
Well,
What do you think?
I was going with some Mega Millions is like bug bounty.
No, not bug bounty, but that's a good guess. What do you think, TC?
Oh, what is it for the fishing when you target the big catch whale?
Oh, that's also good, but also incorrect. Anyone else here in the audience want to guess this one? No.
Blockchain super user.
Okay, no, all of these are wrong.
Blockchain sounds like the best
No,
answer.
we're gonna move on because I'm gonna tell you what it is. It was here. I'll play it again.
It's like the mega millions. It's the big payout.
That would be a honeypot. Everyone following?
Oh my God.
Okay, now is everyone along the lines with my mom's logic here? Okay, got it?
Okay.
All right, here we go. Here's another one.
The person who helps you put the stuff in a safe place for all your files.
Person who helps you put your stuff in a safe place.
Again, this is a technology. What do you think this is?
Can you play it again?
Yeah, I'll play it again.
The person who helps you put the stuff in a safe place for all your files.
DLP.
No. Hold a DLP, someone said. What else?
Server.
Firewall, no. What did you say?
Server.
No, not a server.
Secure storage.
Yeah. Secure file transfer.
No.
Data custodian.
Data custodian, no, by the way, but all good wrong guesses. You want to try this one, TC?
We're very good at being wrong.
As is my mother, I should point out.
I don't know.
Okay, that would be a cloud access security broker.
Oh,
So there you go.
broker,
See?
Casby.
The
Yes.
person who helps you put the stuff in a safe place for all your files.
She's right. She's right. We need to call Gartner.
Yeah. All right. All right, we're going to give you one last one. Let's just do one last one. Let's see if you can figure this one out.
If you have to check that what you're writing with works so that your letters will go out.
Okay, this one you should be able to get. Think about it.
Signatures.
Signatures? No. TC, you want to try this one?
Could you play it again? I'm sorry.
Sure.
These are so hard.
Listen. This one you're going to really listen to this one. I think you can get it.
If you have to check that what you're writing with works so that your letters will go out.
The test cases? I don't know.
Hold on, what is it? Pen testing is correct. The audience got it. Good job, audience. All right.
What would you advise?
What can we learn from the NSA's latest zero trust guidance? Now, back in March, the agency published a new best practices fact sheet. And Robert Lemos at Dark Reading distilled these into 5 key takeaways. 1, expecting threat actors to breach the perimeter. 2, mapping data flows from day one. 3, redefining network segmentation. 4, mature software-defined networking. And 5, accepting iterative progress. So I'll start with you, Mike. Which one do you think most security leaders are not doing or are struggling to do?
So I first want to highlight that I didn't know the NSA had guidance around zero trust, and it was actually
Now you
really
got
good.
it.
Now I got it. So I strongly encourage folks to go read that. But I think the reality is a lot of leaders struggle with all of these. I mean, these are far easier said than done. I think there's general agreement that you can't rely on the edge being your sole control. Like I think we're past the castle and moat models of security at this point. But I do think that, if you look at modern cloud-only architectures, network segmentation becomes easier. So I think some of these are easier to accomplish. But the one that I really want to highlight, it actually is a little bit different than the other of these, is the struggle to accept iterative improvements. We as an industry struggle with the fact of letting best get in the way of better, like all the time. Like, we're not going to go do this thing because it's not the perfect security, so we're therefore not going to do anything, is a struggle that folks constantly are having to deal with. So I do think that if I were to say, hey, pick one of these and focus on this, concentrate on iterative improvements. Slowly getting better over time is going to make you better a year from now. Sure, it's not going to be perfect tomorrow, but that's the one that I really want to see folks focus on, is just accept iterative improvements, accept getting a little bit better every day.
Yeah, I thought you would jump on that one. And that one I see all the time because, I mean, it's hard to go from 0 to 100 immediately. It's impossible. TC?
Yeah, I think there's a couple here. So expecting threat actors to breach the perimeter. Just taking the model, like, let's assume that they have all the access that they need. And then we need to respond to that. Mm-hmm. Because I think if that was something, most companies were able to do, we wouldn't see a lot of the headlines that we already get. I mean, just take, take the healthcare space. Let's just assume the hospital's been hacked and they've put malware on all the devices, right? Okay, what are you going to do? So I think that one really stands out. Another one that I think is really complex is the mapping the data flows from day one, depending on kind of how you define data flows. So we're talking about third-party vendors and fourth-party, fifth-party, sixth-party vendors. We're talking about potentially what people do in their browser, right? That they also do personal stuff on. And then also just the speed of development and all the like SaaS tooling, right? So, I mean, there's areas like I know that for GDPR, you got to have a data map, right? And when it comes to really trying to pin down that data map in real time, there's a lot of vendors in the space, but there's a lot of complexity to be able to understand how you're leveraging different tools like Salesforce custom objects, right? Exactly what type of data is being put here, the amount of customization that you need to get good performance out of those tools. So I think again, expecting the breach from day one, most people I don't think are doing that, are prepared for that. And then the data mapping, it's very difficult given all the technology and how quickly it changes.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but the two of you have some zero trust effort in your organization, yes?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, I think these days it's pretty common to at least embrace some of the concepts of zero trust. So yeah.
So, and you could speak to now or in the past or whatever, when you sort of started down that road, what was the thing that you struggled with?
I think it really is one of those, because part of the model around zero trust is it's as much figuring out what you care about as also setting aside the things that you're not going to care about. You're not going to care about the network that those devices are on because you don't have to trust that network. And so that mental reset of we're going to treat these as a coffee shop, it can get really difficult. You end up with this, but what about? But what if something does get infected? What if something does get in that network? And being able to set aside in your mind that you're just not going to care about that is one of the difficult things you have to get past.
TC?
The hardest part I have with this is the name, right? Zero trust.
Oh, yeah.
So, okay, raise your hand if you are not multi-cloud. If you're literally just in AWS or GCP or Azure, but not the other ones.
Oh,
okay,
I'm
3 hands.
You're trusting
Four
someone.
hands.
Oh, I want that so badly.
Who's our sponsor this week?
So let me tell you about our other sponsors. So thrilled that they're on board here. And that is Normalize, a pioneering provider of cloud data security solutions, helping customers secure their data, applications, identities, and infrastructure across hybrid cloud environments. So with Normalize, organizations can discover and visualize their data attack surface within minutes and get real-time visibility and control into their security posture, including access, configurations, and sensitive data to secure it at scale and prevent expensive data breaches. So Normalize takes a unique approach to assess and associate a monetary value to every data store that is discovered and classified in the customer environment. We've talked about this before. Once you discover it and classify it, you can do a lot with it. So you want to learn more how to do it, you got to go to their site. It's normalize.ai, and let me spell that for you. Normal, NORMALYZE.ai.
There's gotta be a better way to handle this.
So when we were having a long discussion earlier about Reddit and the value of Reddit and how there's a lot of snarkiness that comes up on Reddit, and here is a little bit more of it. But I think it was so popular, this snarky comment, that I think there might be some truth to it. So I want to delve into this. So why are we still dealing with the golden oldies when it comes to web app security? Now, this topic came up on the cybersecurity subreddit, asking why something like an SQL injection, which developers have known about for decades, still is in the OWASP top 10. Now, one Redditor said, and here's a snarky comment, get ready, hold on to your seats, said, the reason for this problem is that, quote, experienced developers leave and they were replaced by less experienced developers. So I will start with you, TC. Is this popular comment just a cheeky response and people were just laughing and that's why they liked it so much? Or is it true that this is the or a reason we still have this problem with things like SQL injection?
I think probably the reason they have SQL injection is because of the frameworks that the experienced developers used when they first built the app, and that if the less experienced developers built it from scratch today, that wouldn't even be possible. So I think just frameworks, that basically the software is still around, right? The other part I'd say is, how do the less experienced developers become more experienced developers, right? And it's probably dealing with an incident, whether it's a production outage unrelated to security, or dealing with security, getting this feedback. But I think there's a learning process. I think what's interesting to me about SQL injection and cross-site scripting and how they've been stamped out of modern frameworks today is that now we have AI and we have prompt injection, and it's a really familiar pattern. So I think, maybe the patterns for these are going to stay, but the incremental progress we're making along the way is just making it so it's safe for developers, where they don't need to know about SQL injection, because that's not going to happen with the technologies they use.
All right. By the way, I'm going to ask you the same. Is there any validity to this statement about experience versus less experienced developers, why we have these problems? Or are we going with TC's answer?
So I actually really like what TC said, which was almost more the experienced developers are the problem.
All right.
And I think relying on the experienced developers and just assuming that experienced developers are never going to make a mistake, that's really the problem that folks need to focus on here. It's not the fact that people can't understand their code. It's the fact that they wrote the code in the first place. And if you actually wrote things with modern frameworks, SQL injection is actually really hard to implement within your code. And that's where we need to get. We need to have these secure frameworks.
Needs to wipe out and greenfield it again.
In some situations, that is actually worth considering. I mean, if you've got code that nobody understands how it works anymore, you're only going to make it worse if you continue. And also,
that's a ticking time bomb.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's going to happen.
There's going to be other bugs. There's availability. The thing's going to crash someday, and nobody's going to be able to bring it back online. And that's what folks really need to be talking about, not the fact that, hey, we've got a new developer who doesn't understand this Fortran code and can't possibly maintain it. It's a ticking time bomb, like you said.
So really, the answer to this, and I think great answers from both of you, is that the reason we have these classic problems is that there's classic infrastructure still out there. It's like there is still Windows XP and NT servers out there operating, and you're going to have problems if those are still running critical.
Yeah, and I think we're picking on SQL injection and some of these other OWASP top vulnerabilities, but one of the ideas is just kind of having an API that exposes information that it shouldn't, right? Or that allows you a type of access that it shouldn't allow. That totally hasn't changed over the past 20 years. And so to me, I understand where this person's writing from. It's I think a place of resentment. It's a really hard economy right now. There's a lot of cost reduction going on.
Well, there's a lot of resentment on Reddit. We know that.
But I think also the trend is actually the opposite, where essentially a lot of companies, what they're doing is they're not hiring junior developers. They're maybe not even doing their internship program. They're actually more crutching on the senior developers because that's seen as more cost efficient. So I think the trend in the industry is the opposite. More senior developers, less junior developers. But I think the good measure of a senior developer or a senior architect is someone that can construct a system where the more junior staff in it are safe. They're not going to make a critical mistake like one of these vulnerabilities. You're only as fast as the rest of your team. And so as they go through different changes, moving over to Kubernetes or moving to a new IAC language, whatever it is, being able to construct it in such a way that it's not completely reliant on you and the other people can still make good decisions and not really shoot the company in the foot. That, I think, is the expectation for a senior developer.
It's time for the audience question speed round.
All right, in my hand, I have a bunch of questions from you, the audience. And with the little time that we've got left, we are going to try to get through as many of these questions as possible. So here's the first one. And either you jump in here. I like this one. Comes from Yash Kosaraju of Sendbird. And Yash asks, what's your favorite interview question that tells you about the person?
Oh, yeah, we just talked about this. So basically, you're a manager, right? And you have someone on your team that's basically a brilliant jerk, right? They're the most complex stuff that just comes down, business needs to make this change. They've already done it. They've already coded that up. That's already done, ready to move. They don't make mistakes. They're completely reliable. They intuit the business, but they're completely insufferable to deal with. Do you keep them on your team or not?
So that being the actual question. Okay.
Yeah, I think it's a great question.
And for those of you who are not big followers,
Yeah.
yes, Bill just noticed something. Mike is not a fan of the brilliant joke.
Yeah,
right?
we're getting rid of that person.
Yes. All right. So Mike, what's your favorite question?
Oh gosh, they're almost always experiential, and it's based on the person that I'm talking to. And so, tell me about a time that you solved this problem. I mean, they're not particularly exciting in this kind of a room, but to be able to ask a question that is related to that person's experience is where you can really get a lot of insights.
All right. Here, next question from Mike Skirko, president over at ISSA Silicon Valley. There he is in the back of the room. We talk a lot, by the way, about getting security into the rest of the company, but he's actually asking the 180 of that. How do you design corporate culture into the security team?
I think it's actually a very good question because it's critical. Your security team needs to understand how the company operates. Otherwise, they can't impact change. If they're just going around laying out policy, saying, thou shalt, those kinds of things, it's not going to get very far. So I really do think a lot of it comes down to being involved, being visible, participating in some of those conversations, being active on your company's Slack channels, in like just the corporate meme channels, like just getting out there and understanding what people are talking and how people talk and driving your own team to do that. That's how you get involved. And that's how you understand, is just soak in it. You'll figure it out pretty quickly.
What do you think, DC?
Yeah, a nice example of this, and I haven't had to do this, but I heard the way DoorDash works is that everybody at DoorDash, all employees, all corporate employees, they're going to have to do a delivery, something like once a month. And so I think that idea of just walking in the other person's shoes, one way to do that is team rotations, right? So if there's an area that you really need to advance security's understanding and maybe the security posture of that area, have someone from the security team do a job rotation. It could even be like 4 to 6 weeks. And then, they're the person who can help you translate with that other team, and they're going to know a lot more about that team's pains.
All right. I have 2 questions here, and they're very much related. The first from Bill Harmer of Craft Ventures, the next from Francisco Igual of SOA Projects. And it's very relevant. We had Joe Sullivan here speak earlier, and he was phenomenal. So very relevant to his presentation. Is it worth it being a CISO anymore? And how do you assess personal risks to yourself of being a CISO?
So the answer to the first question is yes. And the way that I look at this, I was actually literally talking about this earlier today. I got into this field to try and make the world a better place. Like, this is my opportunity. I can help secure companies. I can help secure data. Like, that actually can have an impact on the world. And so that, for me, that will always be there, and that will always be worth being involved. From a personal risk perspective, I think Joe, like I've talked with Joe about this in the past. A lot of it comes down to documenting things, making sure that I think that the term the kids use these days is, make sure you've got the receipts, right? Mm-hmm. Make sure that and have that evidence in case something is going off the rails. But also do your best to not get into those situations in the first place. A lot of those things, you can avoid them. You can see them coming of, that's not going to go well. I'm just not going to get involved in it. And that's the best way to protect yourself. Just avoid it entirely.
All right. It's like the bully at the school. All right. What's your take, TC?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely worth it. I mean, that's why I got into this as well. I'm very driven to help protect other people. And this is I think the perfect role for at least me to be able to do that. But I think what Mike was saying, what I would add to that is integrity, right? So there's the example before you send an email, just picture it being projected in the front of a courtroom, right? So carrying yourself with the integrity, you have duties and obligations to your customers, to your employees, to your stakeholders, to investors. And then if you see something coming up, and based on what happened to Joe, you should know some of the warning signs, right? Seek help. So reach out to your network, find out what your options are, but really, be fully eyes open in terms of the potential impact it could have to you.
All right, I want to squeeze one last question in. Here it is. I think this is a great question from Tyler Pinchard of Support Logic. I'll start with you, TC. How do you instill the safe ability for your staff to have the freedom to share their perspective, even though it may be something you don't want to hear or someone else, and they won't get repercussions for saying it? Like, you want to have that free flow of communications. How do you make them feel like, everyone can say, oh, you can come to me to say anything, but sometimes that's not so clear.
I think this is one of those things where it's the only way you can do it is by doing it. And it takes time to build trust. I think the other thing would be to solicit people's perspectives. And I think, one way it could happen is when you have a team meeting, when you're brainstorming, or when you're, doing a post-incident review or a retro, making space where the team knows that it's part of your agenda. You're going to ask each person there for their perspective.
So be proactive about it.
Be proactive.
Don't sit there and wait for them to come to you.
Exactly. Be proactive. Ask them for it. Give them the space and be respectful. Write it down and don't dismiss it. And if they see that you actively seek people's perspectives and you provide them the respect for that, then I think they might feel more encouraged to provide that themselves because they see that you respecting others.
Good answer, Mike.
When I joined Rivian, one of my team members gave me a gift. We were in the first introduction, all hands. I was introducing myself to the team. And someone stood up and they asked a question. And it was a tough question. And they were the kind of person that just did that. Like that was just in their nature. And it gave me the opportunity to answer that difficult question and do so in a way that was respecting the person who asked the question. And so to TC's point, you just have to live it. You have to give the evidence, have those situations. And maybe you've got to plan it. Maybe you have someone on your team and you plan in advance of like, hey, please ask me a really difficult question in front of the team and I will answer it. You don't have to ask me right now. Just ask me a difficult question. I will answer it. And that way you can actually walk the walk in front of the team. They see it, other people emulate that, and then it just builds from there.
I just want to add to that. I think that's part of the job of a leader, right? And not just that they feel comfortable with that difficult question in front of you, but that they feel comfortable with that difficult question in front of others, even higher than you in the organization, because that's what the leadership in the organization needs to hear in order to grow.
Well, thank you very much, TC and Mike. Let's hear it for them. That brings us to the very end of the show. I want to thank our sponsors. That would be Eclipsium, supply chain security for the modern enterprise, and also Normalize. Keep track of what matters most, your data. Remember, Normalize is NORMALYZE.ai, and Eclipsium, ECLYPSIUM.com/spark. Go check them out. Huge thanks to Richard Greenberg and the entire Planet CyberSec team for inviting us out here. Let's hear it for them. And we really appreciate you supporting us. Thank you. If you're not already subscribed to the CISO series, please do. As always, we greatly appreciate your contributions and listening to the CISO series podcast.
That wraps up another episode. If you haven't subscribed to the podcast, please do. We have lots more shows on our website, CISOseries.com. Please join us on Fridays for our live shows, Super Cyber Friday, our virtual meetup, and Cybersecurity Headlines Week in Review. This show thrives on your input. Go to the Participate menu on our site for plenty of ways to get involved, including recording a question or a comment for the show. If you're interested in sponsoring the podcast, contact David Spark directly at david@cisoseries.com. Thank you for listening to the CISO Series podcast.